Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this GCSE biology video on the population explosion. So this is part of the last chapter of GCSE biology and one that gets quite often forgotten, I would say. So you get towards the end of year 11, maybe you're out for art exams, drama exams, whatever it might be. And this sort of stuff kind of gets a little bit, yeah, you all sort of know it, you watch TV, you've all been on protests, all that kind of stuff. But I'm actually here to not only tell you that this stuff is important for your GCSE, but it's also massively important for our continued survival on this planet. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, okay? So we're going to do a series of shorter videos on all these little bits of basically environmental impact that humans are having. So population, human population, and why there are so many people obviously massively overlaps with geography, but it also comes up in huge numbers of different areas of the biology specification. So really today we're going to be talking about broad principles around human population, and then we'll come back to those ideas when we talk about food security, waste management, maintaining biodiversity, farming techniques, deforestation, and all the other ones that are here on this in this specification. Okay, so the main ideas we're going to cover very briefly are what's happened to the human population over the last 200 years and maybe even further back than that. What are our needs from the environment? What do humans need to take out of the environment and put back? So what effect is a rising population going to have in terms of the resources that we need? And how is this bad for the planet? How is it bad for the planet that there are more and more people? Now, if you're thinking purely from an examination point of view, the main thing you could be given is data interpretation. This chapter is absolutely ripe for examiners to give you graphs and tables of everything from climate change to population change to various pollutions and landfill use and food things and all that kind of stuff. So really important stuff, and stuff that I really hope that you care about, right? Stuff that's really important, okay? And actually I'm heartened by the fact that the younger generation, certainly everyone my age and younger, seems to be a lot more engaged into these kind of ideas than those maybe a little bit older than us, okay? And yes, I did just conveniently lump myself in with the young people. Let me have that, I'm not 40 yet. So, talking of graphs, let's get straight into it. So here we have a graph of human population for over the last 200 years. So we start down here at 1820. The graph's obviously divided up, as you can see, into the different continents with Asia, Africa, colour-coded, Europe, North America, Latin America, and Oceania, all that kind of stuff. So in 1820, there's only about 1 billion people on the planet, 1 billion people. And then we go through the 1800s, right? We go through the 1800s here, right? We come through. We get a bit of a population growth. We're getting population growth in Europe and in North America as we go through there. And then as we come into the 1900s, 20th century, we're actually going to get this enormous, great population explosion after the Second World War, okay, in the 1950s. So this means and that takes us shooting right up, driven largely between 1950 and sort of the 2000s by growth in Asia, right, and latterly a little bit in Africa, up to 7 billion people, over 7 billion people on the planet now. So that's gone up sevenfold, right, since in the last 200 years. It's gone up more than double in people's lifetimes. So people are living around now who actually remember a time where the world's population was half what it is now. That is insane. Okay, now will this continue on forever? Now this is all not going to be negative doom and gloom, you know, we're all going to die stuff, right? It will plateau out. So if we look at a projection of the coming sort of 50 to 100 years, okay, this is the best sort of projection of what's going to happen. As you can see, all that driving of population growth in Asia is actually plateauing already, is actually starting to slow down and is projected to plateau out. And we'll come to the reason why in a moment. Most of the growth has already happened here in North America and in Europe. So we're not seeing any population growth really in Europe. In fact, we're seeing population decline in some of these areas. Little bit of growth in Latin America and South America, not huge amounts, and then not huge amounts in Oceania. So growth over the next 100 years is projected to be driven largely by growth in Africa. Okay, so if you're given this as a describe question on a GCSE, describe the population, the projected population change over the next 100 years, you would be expected to pick out the different areas and say what's going on in the different continents. Okay, so I'm telling you this is going to plateau out, and that's the best projections we have, is that the population will go up and up and up, and it will plateau. So how can I say that? Why can I say that? Why might I know that? And also, is it going to plateau out early enough, right? Are we actually going to get to a point where the Earth can sustain this number of people, okay? Right, let's look a little bit further back and see why this is such a concern and something we need to be so very aware of. Well, if we look back in history, like way back here to archaeological records, about 10,000 BC, the best estimates are there's only about 4 million humans on the planet, right? And as you can see, that's pretty much the way it's been all the way through, and say up to here, to sort of just before 2000 BC, and then up to the year 0, and then obviously this almost vertical line of population growth over the last 100 to 200 years. Okay, why is that, and why is that a problem? Okay, that's basically what we're trying to answer here. Well, this is taken directly from your syllabus. What is it that humans need from their environment? Well, of course we need the space to live. We need building materials to make stuff from, we need food, we need water, energy is a massive one, and we need somewhere to put our rubbish. And obviously every extra person is an extra set of all of that, okay? There's an extra set of all of that, okay? So what I think is really quite terrifying is a milestone that we've gone past literally just a few months ago, okay? Now, all of those things that I've just mentioned, the building materials, the waste disposal, the energy, all these things come from our environment, our living environment. The reason Earth is habitable and other planets aren't, it's largely biology, it's the presence of biology. Obviously the physical conditions make that biology possible, but it's biological systems that are our life support. And in the last few months, right, we've had reported that the amount of stuff on this planet made by us is now greater in mass than all of the living stuff, all of the biomass. If you don't remember that term, go back a video, right? All of the biomass on the planet. So total biomass is now less than total mass of skyscrapers and roads and railways and ships and cars and all that kind of stuff. And that is terrifying, because that stuff doesn't keep us alive. The living stuff keeps us alive, okay? We're intrinsically linked to our ecosystem. So this was published December 2020, widely reported in the press as well. I think this is taken from The Independent, you can see, and particularly with things like plastic and asphalt, okay? We'll come to exactly the effects of those things in later lessons, but that's the effect of an increasing population, is the increasing amount of stuff that we're making and throwing away. Right, to come back to population, why is this happening? Well, I'm not going to go too much into this because this is pure geography, okay? And I don't want to take this off the geographers, but demographics, right, is the answer. For most of that time where we had a flat population for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, what was happening was basically in humans, like every other animal on the planet, two parents would have as many offspring as they could to basically replace themselves into adulthood, because many offspring would die very, very young, okay? As technology has moved on, as countries, parts of the world have started to develop and become more modern, of course, juvenile child death rate has dropped, okay? Because of healthcare, sanitation, better nutrition, vaccination, other medical interventions, all this kind of stuff. But it takes time then from the death rate to start to drop for people culturally to shift to only having 2 children, okay? So the sort of improvement in healthcare and the improvement in survival rate, right, goes up before the birth rate comes down, right, before that cultural shift happens. So initially you start with a high birth rate, high death rate, then you get this point of time which we're living through now, where you end up with high birth rates but lower death rates, and then eventually, as we're seeing in the more developed parts of the world, you get a low birth rate as well as a low death rate as people move more to just having, on average, 2 children families. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world, if you give people the option and you give them the tools, they will just have 2 children families. Okay, that tends to be what happens on average. Doesn't apply to everyone, of course. Some have more, some have none. But on average, that's what people do. So the conclusion is this is how we can say that population will level off. Okay, I'm not going to go into more detail on that. I'm going to show you a quick graph and we'll move on. Right. So as I say, initially in demographic transition, you've got high death rate, high birth rate. Then that's stage 1. Right, then of course you end up with a bit of development coming in, right? A bit of development coming in, the death rate starts to drop, but the birth rate stays high, and this is in this section here where you get rapid increase. Okay, stage 3, people start to get used to this low death rate, and the birth rates start to fall, and then stage 4, right? You must remember where the limits of my box are. Stage 4, you end up with low birth rates and low death rates and an aging population. And that's what we see if we look at places like Europe and North America. Okay, you actually see the population getting older, living longer, right, with fewer children underneath. And that has its own problems. We're not going to go into those now. Okay, and as evidence for this demographic transition, you can actually look at census data. This is census data from the US about the number of children per woman, which you can sort of imagine as a family replacing itself. Doesn't always work that way, but it's a proxy measure. So in 1800, the average American woman would have 7.5 children in her lifetime. So between 7 and 8 children each, right? That's an average. There's some doing more than that and some doing fewer. That is crazy. And then obviously as the US develops and becomes a more modern country through to 1900, that's dropped to 3.5, but still 3.5, that's a growing population. And if you look now, it's actually at 1.9. So we've got a slightly lower birth rate than replacement, because obviously if you 2 children, it's replacing the 2 parents. Okay, the UK in 2020 is actually would see a similar trend, but obviously less. It would be slightly ahead of the USA because we're a slightly more older, more established country. In 2020 now, actually, we have an even lower birth rate of 1.7 births per woman in the UK, which means that our population is shrinking at the bottom and getting older at the top. And you might have heard all sorts of stuff about the aging population, but we're not going to go into that. So we will plateau out, we will level out, you will get to a point if development carries on where people are around the world, whatever country or whatever culture they come from, are having 2 children families. The question is, where will we be technologically by then? Will our planet be able to support that many people? And the estimate is about 10 billion before it starts to plateau out. Okay, and the question really then is, what will that do to the living environment around us? Will we A, manage to survive nicely through to technology and innovation, or B, will there be conflict, starvation and issues with resource use? Okay, and that answer is going to come about in your lifetime. Okay, so my 2 cents on the end here, just to end on a sort of a slightly feminist note, and I think it's important. The key to stabilising populations is giving people control over their own education and their own reproduction, right? Particularly women, right, around the world, right? Particularly if you give women control over their educational and their reproductive destiny, that has a massive impact on the wealth of a country, on the stability and the development of a population and of a nation. Okay, so obviously if you allow particularly women, but men as well, to stay in education longer, they tend to delay having children and they tend to have fewer children, right? Because obviously they've got the money, they've got the resources to make sure they live in a stable country, that they're going to have their 2 children and they're going to survive. Healthcare, of course, you've got to be confident of your healthcare system, right, for all this to work. Family planning, female reproductive control, very, very important. Okay, if you can give people control over their reproduction so they have a choice as to when they have their families, then they can finish education, they can have a career, and this particularly applies to women. And obviously if you give women in all cultures and all countries social and economic freedom, then they become highly trained, they become highly skilled, and they essentially double your skilled workforce. The economic output of a country goes up, the development rate doubles, because of course you've got more of the population involved in developing your country and your population. Okay, so that's the key for me to stabilizing the population. So that is a very, very quick run through a very, very complicated topic. I highly recommend you watch this documentary. I'm going to give a link in the description. It is absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic. It's called Don't Panic, The Truth About Population. It's entertaining, it's clear, and the data representation is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to put a link in there. It's definitely well worth a watch if you're interested in this area. It gives you a lot more in-depth details than the sort of brief overview I've given you there. Okay, next up, pollution. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.